All right, John, how does one back up the data that lives on a vSAN cluster?
So let's be clear about what backups are. Backups are copies of data that preferably have some level of immutability or separate. They have a separation, so they're not stored on the same thing they're protecting from. And snapshots, can rehydrate that data and resubstantiate that and the amount of loss. So I do denote that, for instance, stretched clusters, while great for availability, are not a backup. So let's look at our options for backing up data on vSAN. How do we get copies of that data off? So the leading way for this are the storage APIs for backup. Previously, and generally, often this is still known as VADP. This is a collection of backup APIs that a large number of backup providers work with. In fact, every backup provider you could probably ever want to backup has support for VADP. There are different devil in the details of implementation. So historically, there are 4 transport modes to get data off of a cluster. There's a network-based mode, NBD. There's a encrypted network-based mode, NBD SSL, which now uses TLS. You also have direct SAN mode, which is not supported on vSAN. That's where you would plug a fiber channel connection directly into your backup server and slurp it out that way. That's unnecessary because of how vSAN's topology is. And then there's hot add. Hot add is where you have data movers or proxies that are part of your backup software that run within that vSAN cluster and can directly see those VMDKs. And they basically, a snapshot's created. And rather than the host necessarily hairpin that data out over the NBD method, that proxy can directly process and access it through the SCSI layer. It basically double mounts those drives. This is generally viewed as a very fast operation and a very efficient operation. It allows data compaction for that backup software before it sends it off to wherever the repository or object storage or tape library or wherever it's sending data can do. It can do that within that host cluster. These are all options. I encourage you to talk to your backup vendors. Some have very strong opinions. Some may say, hey, we're just going to do NBD and that's fine. We're going to configure lots of streams and just make sure you got big network pipes and you're good. Some are really going to love hot add and that'll be their preferred option. NBD is really a fallback that they don't necessarily prefer. And then there's also some additional options for additional data protection. There are also VIO, which is a IO write splitting type API filter. This is used for data protection of incredibly sensitive workloads. So while you normally would not necessarily run VADP, people might run it a couple of times a day or something like that. This isn't something, or maybe every couple hours. It's not something you're going to run every 5 minutes or every 15 seconds. And so what VIO lets you do is get that more kind of a DVR like functionality where it does a write split, it sends that data out, and then you've got potentially consistency points in a stream. This lets you do snapshotless backup, so to speak. So what this is viewed at, this can do incredible levels of protection to where you can fail back to just a couple of seconds from before the host was struck by a meteor. But this does have additional resource overhead. Talk to the vendors. There's often limits. They might not be able to support more than 50 VMs on a host or something like that. There's additional compute overhead. So lastly, traditional in-guest agents still exist. There's still people who, in Oracle, they use RMAN and they pointed at something or they put an agent in. I know some people prefer virtual machine-based backups. There's some awesome capabilities of that. But it's not always one size fits all. And particularly the larger your environment is, the more likely you may take different approaches for different workloads. You might even take a blended approach where you use VADP once or twice a day, and then you do have a software that does log shipping on the databases within that. Within VMware world, we also have some data protection capabilities to where we can replicate virtual machines using vSphere replication, and it can have multiple checkpoints. You can do quiescing. That isn't necessarily, it's a full backup product. It doesn't have brick level recovery. You're not doing file level recovery. It's more about just keeping some copies of VM somewhere else. You're not necessarily going to do deep retention and keep months of that, checkpoints or anything with it. We also have our new data, our DR as a service platform, which can replicate data cost effectively into cloud and be able to restore into cloud. And that is actually some kind of cool thing. So data protection and backup it's a spectrum, and there's a lot of different capabilities, and we've got a lot of great partners as well as some of our own tooling. But I encourage you to figure out, look at it from an approach of, what do I need to accomplish? What do I need to protect? How often do I need to protect it? And what is the, if I'm arguing with the business about necessarily trying to hit a specific RPO or RTO, let's find out what the true cost differences are, or what the compliance is mandating, rather than just say, what do I need to protect and how often? Because then people may say, well, you need to protect everything and every 3 seconds, and that's may not necessarily be viable for what your budget is. So take a look at those options.